Welcome to our little presentation here on using Twinmotion to plan phasing logistics and certain clashes on a construction site. Now, just a little introduction here. My name is Jeff, and I work in CAD and CGI visualization here as a application specialist. Many people may already know me. So as a little brief introduction there, I worked in CAD and design and 3D visualization for the best part of 30 years now, probably is actually 30 years. I've developed in training content for CAD and 3D visuals for AEC, manufacturing, broadcast, and the video games industry. So let's look at phasing here. Let's just wait a minute. I lost a slide here. Not to worry. Let's have a look at this phasing here. So let me just come out of that for a second here. I don't know why my agenda disappeared there, for example. Not to worry. My agenda was to look at workflow with the Revit phasing, importing Revit phasing into Twinmotion, adding Twinmotion phases features to visualize site planning and create a presentation in there. So let's actually get ourselves started in here. Here, I've got a little project here that is a project I use in my training on Revit. When I'm working with Revit here, when I work with Revit, what we have is phasing in Revit. Revit has its own phasing. So this, at the moment, you can see my view of a Twinmotion scene, which is essentially a building here, and there's an outbuilding here, a little bit of foliage around here, which is basically where I would start my project. But if I jump back into Revit for a second, just to give you an idea of what I'm really looking at here, is that in Revit, we have a few features here that you're probably familiar with. And one of those is that we can use phasing. We can use our Revit phasing in here. So here I have a relatively simple model of a building here. It's sort of like a guest house, to be honest. It's a guest house in a plot in the countryside. They have an outbuilding here, and the next door is over here. And what the process is, or the project is to do, is to phase this so that we've got another phase, which will be to clear up the existing building here, take away some of this foliage. So that would be a site clearance for a phase called site clearance. And then moving forward with the build phase, I would come to phase A here in my Revit. So this is just very simple, just a slab here, to be honest, in my phase. Nothing too spectacular here, just a simple slab there. But it does mean that the building has been removed here, or the outbuilding. And then I will look at my phase B here. This phase in my Revit project is essentially a little building that was put here, and really represents a little dining hall or breakfast room, kitchen for the guest house. And lastly, the idea was that we would actually, through phase C, put a conservatory in here as well. So that was really the basics of my Revit concept at the moment. So I'm not going to go more into Revit here. It's just that in Revit, what I did have, of course, I've got my 3D views here that I've been working with, just showing you there, the 3D views here, and phase A, phase B, phase C. But what I also did within my Revit was actually created a view, and so I've got something like phase A only. So that is essentially just that slab, which was phase A only. And if I come over to phase B only, I've got the building here. One of the things I tend to do with my Revit, now I'm not saying that this is actually how we should do this. It just works for me in that very often when I'm working with a Revit model, especially bringing it over into Twinmotion, I tend to want to optimize the model down a little bit so that I'm not creating too much data. Now, I couldn't say this is actually right or wrong, but if I come to VG graphics within my Revit here, you can see that obviously I've got a lot of model categories turned on here. But from a point of view of an export, what I tend to do in my Revit here, I would select all of this. That's essentially my building here, and even just come into the temporary hide isolate here like this. And then I would actually on my hide, whoops, here, I'd apply that to the view. Looks like nothing's happened, but if I come back to my VG here, it's turned off all of the other categories. Now, some people say it doesn't matter because you're not exporting any geometry, but I sort of like the idea of it being a little bit cleaner there so that I could export that. So I created the geometry through views in the phases that they are. Now, if I go back to my days many years ago creating geometry for the gaming engine, it was very useful that we had very minimal polygons. So therefore, to be honest, when I'm working with Revit, some of the Revit geometry is quite a small polygon. So if I clean it up and tidy it up in Revit, then I can send that out into Twinmotion a lot easier. So in essence, I would come to my Datasmith here. I'm working on Revit 2023 at the moment. If you're working on Revit 2024, the connectivity is in the View tab here. But here is mine here under Datasmith here. And then I can export the files. So I can export these phases as we go here. So essentially, each one of those items are sent out as a Datasmith file, and then will allow us to bring that into Twinmotion. So if I jump over to my Twinmotion, I'll just close out my Revit there, and then come over to my Twinmotion here. So essentially what I would do in here now is that this is actually the project that I'm going to end up with. So if we look at what I'm doing at the end, I'll come back to and show us the little workflow that I created. Here I've got that same building then, and I've got that imported in here. I've got the trees in here brought in and the outbuilding there. Now this outbuilding here that I created here, as you noticed a moment ago within Revit, it was actually just a massing study there. Didn't need to be anything more than that in Revit, because it's being demolished. But for me, in my visualization, I quite like the idea of having this outbuilding modeled a little bit better. I knew that the outbuilding was stone, so I did actually come over and actually created that in Max. I created it in 3D Studio Max. So I've got texture on here that will work in Twinmotion, and it's not actually in Revit. So we've got not only Revit geometry, but I can bring in 3D Studio Max geometry as well. And in here, I created the textures. And as you can see, these textures here are actually not tiled textures. I've got a complete wall here. In fact, I've got them meeting correctly at the corner here. It's just a little bit of me being a bit pernickety perhaps, but it works. And for example, if I just jumped over to the materials in here, you can see that I'm using actually for the old walls here, physical material, for those that want to understand that if I use a physical material in here, it will come into Twinmotion a lot cleaner. So there's my building in here. So I could then export this. I could indeed export out of my AutoCAD. I could export out of my 3D Studio Max as either an FBX here, or indeed I can use the Datasmith, again, Unreal Datasmith here. I tend to like using FBX because very often I can export an FBX and embed the media that's within the file. Not so much on this project, but a lot of projects I would use that. So let me just come back out of, let's just even close that up for the moment here. So bring us back to my project in Revit. Now, that's what I would have in here. This is my building here. Now, if we look at my media I've made here, we'll look at this in a second here, in that I've got several views in here that I've made. I've got site start here. So in other words, it's the building, some long grass here needs cutting, the poplar trees there, and so on. So I've got site start here, and then of course I've got phase A here, which is basically the start here, and then phase A is just the original here. Phase B, in this instance, you're seeing that I've got the new build there, and I've got a place for the site hut and the block work and the materials. And then lastly, I've got the conservatory coming in here in the final phase. So that's my Revit. And then I created some views here for my landscaping. I just put some landscaping, some sunflowers there just because I can. Some few people in there as well. And then car parking, I just put the cars in here. And so that just gives us a little bit of scale and where the parking would be on a little guest house. And then I jump to my conservatory over here. I've got a nice view internally within my conservatory. I've also did a view here, which is essentially, this is my view of my outbuilding, but I actually put this model in here, which is my site hut and block work. So I wanted to make sure that the block work would be able to be placed, the materials placed, the site hut is placed, and it wasn't impede anything that I'm working with. So this is how we are, this is how we're working. Now, the reason why I wanted to look at phasing in this regard is that because I've got several components in here, if I come back to the import here, you can see I've got an FBX that I've imported there as a site hut, phasing here from Revit, and then FBX there is from the bricks and cement and stuff like that, and there's my FBX of my outbuilding there. So in our Twinmotion, we can import a lot of geometry. We can then, of course, bring in things from Sketchfab. We can do mega scans as well. But for the moment, I'm looking at my Revit in here. Now, if I come over to look at what I'm talking about with my phasing, this is what I'm talking about with phasing in this regard. So my phasing now is basically a track here. I've got a track here called Revit phases. So essentially that geometry that I made in Revit, I'm going to put that into this phase track here. I just minimize that a little bit. So I can see that I've got existing there. If I looked at this one here, that would be that phase. But because I'm looking at my phasing, I'm not actually looking at it in my camera. I can turn and tumble this around, say, oh, okay, I got the phase there, the first phase there with that slab on. Next phase here is got this outbuilding here. So sorry, the phase, the restaurant, breakfast room, kitchen in there. Next phase along here, which would be the conservatory, and then the new landscaping. But these phases here are the Revit phases essentially. But also in here, I created a phase track for my site here. Now, if I look at my phase track for my site here, you can see that I placed the hut the site hut here and some materials here. If I activate and show existing here and there, you can see that actually if I place my site hut just there, it doesn't impact my existing building there. So I still can start my site work here by having the site hut here and initially some buildings, some materials here. If I move over to the next phase there, I can have the next phase where the building is being demolished, of course, and then I can see that obviously the site hut and the materials still work there. They're not being impeded by anything. If I jump over to the next phase here, I've built the new phase here of the breakfast room and kitchen, and I can still actually have my site hut here. So I don't have to move my site hut whilst that phase is being built. So that still fits into the environment. But then if I move over to this phase here, obviously I'm going to need to stop the site hut. So that site hut actually would not be in position when phase C is happening. So I would probably have a site storage over here so that I've got the idea, I've got some site storage going on here as I'm completing my building. So you could see that in essence, I've got the build here where I've got short of space here, and I've just checked to see if I can actually place that in place, my site hut whilst I'm building. But of course, it's got to be moved whilst I'm in building because of course it's part of the project here. And then lastly, when I've finished all the landscaping, the project is actually gone. So if we look at how we can do that in essence, not spend too much time on here, but if I come to here to come to my home here, one of the aspects of Twinmotion I rather like is indeed the templates that we've got here. So if I look at something like the architecture day and night skies, if you like, we can start with a principal template or not. You know, I could start a new scene here with no template. But if I looked at this one, if I click on no there for the moment, I create a new little project here. So this is what I'm saying. If I click on an import now in this, and then come over to my file. So let me just jump over to, so let's say, just a second, to my Datasmith here. I'm just bringing in that Datasmith, so that one there, for example, that's that site clearance there, simple there. I bring that, if I leave my hierarchy here, because what I want to do within this is keep the hierarchy. In other words, all those components I've got in Revit, so the walls, doors, windows, everything like that are kept in here. I don't want to collapse it all by material because perhaps I might want to change some of the materials on certain walls that I don't want all the material to change. And of course, collapse all means that basically it's one unit. So I'm going to keep the hierarchy here and click on import here. So in essence, I import this into my scene. So this is my geometry coming in straight from that import, which once again is quite good. There, we've got it here. Now, when I do this, of course, I've got these Revit components here, like these trees here. And you can see that I've got all of this planting down here. And that's why I said I wanted to keep all of these components. So I'm not going to collapse it all. So I've got those two trees, or actually there's three trees here. Oops. So these three trees, if I just if I select this one, and this one, those are those popular trees. Now, those particular trees, this is let's say this is important in my little project because that particular trees are part of my landscape here, and that's an important aspect of the building. These are popular trees. Maybe the guest house is called poplars. The point is that I can then look at my planting from my Revit, select them all, right click on here, and then replace the object. So then I can replace the object and pop them into here. So for example, I come over to my vegetation, trees, and then there's a poplar tree here. I just drag this over into there, poplar tree, and replace that. So very quickly, I'm starting to replace this geometry. In fact, if we wanted to, we could go to all of these other trees here. If I did all of these trees into here like that, I can right click once again, we can replace that object, and that means that I could actually, instead of just putting one in here, I could say, well, actually, I'm going to change those type of trees to whatever. So I can have a classically horse chestnut in here, for example, and one of any other trees in here. So let's say these poplars and stuff like that. So essentially, I can put as many as I want into here, and that would randomly replace all of those in there. So I've got a relatively random replacement going on here. So that essentially means there I've got this model comes in here. So we can then add in all of this other geometry as well. So for example, if I wanted, I can do the plus here and add in, if I wanted to add in the file, if I come into my file here, sorry, it's just jumped on the other screen, and let's have my outbuilding, my FBX outbuilding here. Once again, I can bring that into the scene. There it is, and it'll come into the scene here. So if I look at just coming all the way up here, collapsing all this a little bit here, there's my outbuilding there. And then I can bring that into position and put that there where it's got to go, this type of thing. So like I said, I'm using not only my my Revit geometry, but also my 3D Studio Max geometry in here. So the idea now is that I can continue to bring in the other phases if we wish. And we would do that through coming over to this little media over here. But before I jump onto the phasing, you can notice, because I've worked with one of the templates here, I can see that I've got obviously a view here. So if I just position myself in a relatively decent view here, I could see that I've got various concepts here that are already in the template. So if I just clicked on a refresh here, this would refresh this view to this template. So for example, I could even jump along to any of these. You can see my building is a little bit high there. And so on. I could look at some of these presets that give us some really good opening start here. So I can create some day-night views relatively quickly in here. Now, once again, like I said, jump to any of these views here, slightly damp day here, this type of thing. And of course, then create our own views. But from the phasing point of view, here's the phasing group here. So at this moment in time, I don't have any phasing study going on here. So I can create a phasing study here. So in this concept here, I've got a phase A, phase one, a track one there. I could actually rename this. Sorry, just come back to here. rename this, and let's just call this my Revit. Oops, there we go. Revit phases. I can use my Revit phases here. So I got Revit phases on here, and if for example in this Revit phase I wanted to take out the outbuilding, I can actually take out the outbuilding, so just to hide it in there like that. So in phase 1 here, or phase A, I would have the outbuilding. I can add in, of course, then with that selected, pop in a new phase in here. So I could then put the new phase in here and come back to my imports. For example, I could do the plus in here and bring in my other phases that I've exported from my model. So basically I'm bringing those in here. Now, like I said, I come to my phasing study here. One of the things I do like about this is that, as I said, I got my Revit phase here, but I could actually, with nothing selected, I clicked on here, I can create a whole new phase in here. So this is one of the things I quite like with our Revit, in that our Twinmotion, is that I can create geometry in this phase. So for example, if I come back to my library here, what I've done with my library in here, I've created a user library like this. So I've created a user library for my work in Twinmotion, and very often I may have some 3D Studio Max content that I want to bring in. So I could actually bring this, let's say the site hut, bring that in here, some of the brickwork or whatever, and that could come into here. So I've got now site hut, and I've got my blocks and cement here. So they've come in their own container. So if I looked at phase 1 here, I could turn them off of phase 1. Sorry, they would stay off on that phase. Then when this jumps over to this phase, that disappears, but I could have this phase here showing them there. So that phase could last a lot longer. Do you see what I mean? So the idea is that the Revit phase can stay consistent as one track, and then I can create another track here to create more phases on incidental geometry. So that really is what I'm looking at with phasing. Now, if I come back, then let's just jump back to my phase build animation here. Once again, we can start to create that, essentially that process in here. Like I said, a little bit Blue Peter style is that I've already created it here. Just thinking about it for a moment. There we go. So I'm back to this the earlier project here. So if I come to my imports here, these are the buildings geometry that I created in here, of course. And then if I look at my phasing here, this is the phasing I created for this. So my existing phasing there, my phase A, my site hut, and stuff like this. So that's exactly how I would create this process. So with that in mind, then we could jump over to certain images here. So for example, I've got several images in here. So for example, I could I could go to a given view here, let's say this conservatory view there. I've got a conservatory view there that I've created, and then I can save that as a view. That can be saved as a view. At the moment, it's just as a view. So it's a camera position in essence. If I come over to my phasing here and look at this now, if I wanted to turn and tumble where I am, this in my phasing, this doesn't impact any of my views. because this is me turning and tumbling my model around in the view. So if I wanted to come over to phase A and turn and tumble around, obviously I can do that, and so on. Or if I want to have phase A and my site hut, I can turn and tumble as well. So I'm getting a very good visual representation. If I come back to my images here, I can take images from wherever I want. So for example, there's my go back to this image here. There's my site start image there. So that is essentially the site start image, and so on. And we can create a lot more images. Now with these images here, essentially these are for like camera angles. So this as an image here, if I look at the properties here, if I turn the properties on, because I've got an image selected here, I've got all of the relevant data in the ambience of this view here. So for example, I can change the environment in here. So if I wanted to global lighting to be changed, exposure, classic one there with the weather, we can change that type of thing as well. So I can change anything we like here. I could duplicate the view, duplicate it, change the weather, save it as another name, and so on. So this is really nice in here. So I've got details here. So for example, height of the fog and wind speeds and vegetation growth, weather effects. So for example, I could turn off the weather effects there and go to winter here. So, you know, it's just the trees changing color, not necessarily snowing, this type of thing. So there's some really nice little features in here once we get our geometry into here, the HGRI environment. This this environment is using one of the environments that come in with this, but you can of course use any of the HDRI you're using if you're using in 3D. So this is our ambient here, but in the same area I've got this concept of an image here. So I have an image there, format, output size, and if I want to create a decent size render, I can do it from here. So for example, I've got 1920 1080, just normal HD, 4K image, was it 3840 by 2160. So we've got some nice imagery. We've got some bigger images there, or indeed make a custom image there. So once I've compiled these images, I can actually put all these images and export these images and the phasing as well. So over here, I've got an animation that I've created. We've got a couple of animations I've created. One, the phasing animation is here. So essentially I can have a phased animation. So I've just got a camera pan and then it just picks up the phase in here. So this particular properties here, oops, of this phasing basically means that I can add in the phasing study in here, and then I create a nice view here. So this animation, I'm just leaving that running like that. So essentially you can see I've got a presentation here where we can say, look, this is going to need to demolish here. We're going to use this area for our hut. This is where we're going to put our geometry in here. This is where we're going to build. We're going to need to remove all that out the way, and then eventually we're going to have some nice landscaping going on here. So I've got nice little animation there. If I come back to this other first animation, this one here, this is really just a small animation of the existing, what it looks like at this moment in time. So it's just a little pan of what's existing. So the client is looking at this saying, oh yeah, I got it there. That's what we've got. One of the concept actually here was that in essence there was an idea that this building would be reused to be the breakfast room, but it's changed. So it gave us not only just the concept of the phase in the building, but the conceptual understanding of that. So we're looking good. So we've got some phases here. There's the phases. I've just created one phasing group here. Now over here then we've got presentations. So for example, I click on presentation here. This is my phasing presentation here. So this particular presentation is giving me these views here. So I could actually send this presentation either to the cloud or local to our local server, for example. The reason why I wanted to flag this up is that we can, with Twinmotion from our Epic Games login, we can actually upload this to the cloud. So several things here. I've got presentation here. I've got videos here, and I've got some images here. So all of this in a batch format, I can send out as an export here. I can export this here. So for example, you can see I can add in, I've got 14 images there, 2 videos, 1 presentation. This is all local. So the images and the videos and presentation local, but I can also upload this to my cloud access. So this is what I've done actually. I've uploaded this to our cloud access. So if I just come over, if I can just see that here from a presentation point of view, give me a second here. Presentation here. I've got this, all of these, this has been rendered locally. So I've got all those images there and the guest house animation here and the guest house phasing here. And also I've actually got the Twinmotion presenter in here. Now this one I've got locally, but I have actually put this, I will give, what I have is a link for this on the cloud. So if I just start the presentation here, just to see how you feel with this, it's just starting up again. It will be on there in a second. Just give it a few moments there. So in other words, what I've created it locally here. So here is the presentation that you can give your clients. So in this presentation, I've incorporated 3 general views of my project. Here's the 3 views here, like this. Now, with this presentation mode like this, I can actually click on the presentation mode here. These mode here, just a second, it's not showing me in here. There we go. So I've got the presentation in here. Let's just, forgive me here, it's just not giving me the view that I want, but not to worry, that's actually okay. It's just not refreshing properly, forgive me there. So I've got the view here that we can turn and tumble essentially in our view here. Let me just close that out of the way. So that presentation I've also uploaded onto the cloud. So what I'll do with that, if anybody wants to actually have a look at this particular presentation, please get in touch with our fine telemarketing team and have a look at this presentation that I've done. So it's really basically a link to this presentation. So let me just, I don't know what was happening with that one there at the moment, because I've got that one set on my local file here. So that was just, let me just see if that works again. Just a second here. So see if we're all okay. It's just loading again here. So I've got this one here. Just forgive me, it's not letting me locate this, but basically this, you can see that you've got this opportunity here. There's normally a little anchor there. I don't know what's going on here, but essentially then this is what we will have. I will, like I said, I'll show you that in this, cancel there. I'll show you that as a link anyway. So you're more than welcome to have a look at that. So essentially very quick, jumping between Revit, between Twinmotion, and using the features within Twinmotion to sort of balance a phasing in here. I quite like this in that I can have a phasing study in here, not only look at the position of items in relation to each other. If I create the presentation, you've got more of a visual clash as well. So a little bit more than just the Revit phasing. I like the Revit phasing, but Revit phasing, of course, is a linear evolution of the project. So what I wanted to do is add in some areas here, so like the site hut in here, this type of thing. So I've got to see where the site hut is. If I look at phase A there, plus site hut, or phase B plus site hut, will it work? That will work. Yeah, I like that. That works. Does it work if I put phase B, site hut, and the site store together? You think, yeah, that works as well. So I do like the idea that we can layer some visual concept here.